Ethics of the Fathers is customarily studied during the period between Passover and Shavuos. Some people extend it throughout the entire summer up until Rosh Hashanah. But after the study of each of the 6 chapters, the rabbis who instituted the custom of reciting this book added another quote, another Mishnah from another part of the Mishnah, and appended it to the 6 chapters. So every time we study a chapter, we add that Mishnah, which we're going to be doing today. The rabbis were very funny. You know, a rabbi once said, "Before I speak, I like to say a few words. Before you do anything, up for it. And then when you're finished, you say, well, now we're finished, but let me just add something more." As a way of saying that as much as we feel that we've accomplished, we've finished, we're not really finished. There's more to it than what meets the eye. So this Mishnah comes from a tractate called Makos, which deals with corporal punishment. And at the very end, it quotes this Rabbi Hananiah ben Akashia. And he would say as follows: "It pleased the Holy One, blessed, to grant merit to Israel. That is why he gave them Torah and its commandments in abundance." There were many teachings of Torah and many commandments. And this is based on what it said in the book of Isaiah. The Lord was pleased for his righteousness to make Torah great and glorious. That God wanted to make the Torah great and glorious, meaning the Torah should not just be a very small body of knowledge, a very limited number of commandments, but it should be in abundance, in great abundance.
Sounds like Django.
So, what is the connection between this Mishnah and Ethics of the Fathers? One connection is, after we've focused so much on the importance of ethics, of leading an ethical life, we're told that the ultimate way to achieve ethical life is through Torah and Mitzvahs. There are many cultures that focus on ethics, many religions and cultures, and even secular cultures. But because they are man-made, they are imperfect. Ethics of the Fathers begins with the words, Moses received the Torah from Mount Sinai, and he passed it down to Joshua, and from Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the men of the great assembly, and so on. This emphasizes the idea that all of Judaism, including the ethical and moral teachings, are godly. They were given to Moses at Mount Sinai. So when we're dealing with ethics, we're not dealing with man-made ethics, we're dealing with divine ethics. But the ultimate source of ethics are the actual commandments in the Torah. While we can talk about an ethical way of living, the most edifying, the most purifying, the most refining aspects of ethics come from the observance of the commandments. Why is it that the observance of the commandments are so refining? Because they are divine, and only God could know exactly what clicks. You can go to a therapist, for example, trying to get help for whatever it is, and sometimes the therapist will click with you and be able to help, and that's good, and sometimes not. Sometimes the health therapist could be totally off base. Sometimes the doctor could be totally off base, and many times the doctors know what they're doing, and we appreciate it. But it's impossible for a doctor to always do the right thing, for a therapist to always do the right thing, to a teacher of morality, a coach or whatever, to always do the right thing, because it's man-made, and we don't always know what makes a person tick. We could guess, we could experiment, and we should, and to a certain extent we'll be successful. But you know that you're always going to be successful when you're using a therapy that comes from God Himself. And that's why Ethics of the Fathers concludes with a statement that the ultimate source of ethics comes from Torah and mitzvahs. And the fact that God gave us so much Torah and so many mitzvahs, that means that God knows that we're all very different, and sometimes one mitzvah could resonate with one person and not resonate with another. So we have an abundance. Whatever department you feel you're a part of, you have a part of Torah and mitzvahs that will address your needs and your lack, your faults, and be able to make you a better person. Yes?
I just want a point of clarification for myself, because I just don't know. Are the mitzvot only written, or are there mitzvot that are in the Talmud? And also, is there a higher value on the written aspect of Judaism, the Torah, over the oral tradition?
Okay, you're asking a very broad question. In short, all of Torah, whether it's in the written or the oral Torah, are God's will. They're expressing what God's will. And sometimes God expresses it explicitly in the written text. Sometimes He expresses it through the oral tradition. What's the difference? Ultimately, you know this is God's will. If, let's say, I want someone, one of my students, one of my kids, to do something, and I'll say to this child, I want you to do this. The child knows that's what I want. Sometimes I won't tell the child directly. I'll tell someone else, do me a favor, could you please tell my child to do this? It may not be as clear, as direct, but it's still my will. So it's not a question of which is more important, because they're both important in different ways. Each one has its own objective.
Are the mitzvot explicitly written, or are there mitzvot that are in the oral tradition?
Well, in the Torah, there are 613 mitzvahs that are explicitly written. The way they're interpreted and understood is taken from the oral Torah, which was later on put in the Talmud. Okay, that's a subject for itself. Could it be broke by telephone? It's the very opposite. The written word is distorted more than anything else. And I like to use the example, the most important teaching in Judaism is that God is one, and it's in the Shema. And there can't be anything more clear than that. Yet, other religions interpreted that the God is saying there are three. The very same verse of the Shema is interpreted by another religion as there are three gods, or that God is a composite of three. So you can take a written word and twist it and distort it. When you hear from your teacher exactly what it means, and your teacher is able to answer your questions, and it's not just one teacher, it's thousands, hundreds of thousands of teachers to so many different students. If anything gets distorted, it's caught right away. Whereas the written word, if I would rely that people would just read a written word, 10 people would come up with 10 different meanings of what that word means. You would never be able to know the truth, because you need to have a communication. That's what the oral Torah does. But I don't want to focus on the oral Torah right now. That's a subject unto itself, and we'll God willing, we'll have many classes about that. So God wants us to be able to find a God-given method for our benefit, and that is through the many mitzvahs that we do. Now, Rabbi Hanania is saying over here that God wants to do us a favor, essentially. He gives us merit. So what does He do? He gives us many commandments. But the question is asked, aren't there just as many opportunities to mess up? If we had fewer commandments, there would be fewer ways of messing up. If I give you 100 commandments, you have 100 ways of doing something good and having merit, but you also have 100 ways of messing up your life if you don't do them. So what is the benefit? The net benefit seems to be zero. Because there are more ways of messing up than there are ways of doing the right thing. How many positive of the 613 commandments? How many of them are positive do's? 248. How many negatives, how many do-nots are there? 365. The last time I counted, 365 is over 100 more than 248. So you have more opportunities to mess up than you do to do the right thing, to do something good. So what's the benefit of having so many mitzvahs when you could really cause yourself more harm than if you didn't have as many? So that's a question asked by many of the commentators, and one of the answers given is that there are actually commandments in the Torah that the Torah did not have to tell us that we shouldn't do certain things. Like the Torah tells us, and this is the example given, this is by Rashi's son-in-law. Rashi wrote a commentary on the whole Talmud, except in certain places we don't have his commentary because he passed away before he finished it, and his student, I think it was his son-in-law, known as the Rivan, he completed it. So this Mishnah is in that tractate where Rashi did not comment on it, but his son-in-law or his student commented on it, and he says that there are certain commandments, like the Torah says we shouldn't eat creeping things. Who in their right mind would want to eat creeping things? Now don't tell me that there are people who do that nowadays. But
wandering in the desert might allow you to do that, though.
Well, we're not talking about when your life is in danger. When your life is in danger, you can eat anything. But we're talking about a normal case. Do you have to be commanded not to eat cockroaches? But yet the Torah commands us not to eat those critters. So there are so many commandments that we would do without being commanded. But if we do it without being commanded, doesn't give us any merit. It doesn't make us better people. If I don't eat a creeping creature, I don't want to ruin your lunch. You're not going to get any credit for it unless it becomes a mitzvah. Now that God says not to eat it, even though you wouldn't eat it anyhow, you're revolted by it, but because God says not to eat it, by not eating it, you are doing a mitzvah. You are connecting to God. You are getting another merit. It's like if someone tells you, if you don't commit this crime, I'll give you $1 million. I wasn't thinking of committing that crime anyhow. Do I deserve $1 million? The answer is no and yes. No, normally you would think you don't deserve credit for not doing something you wouldn't do anyhow. But God wanted to give us more opportunities to have merit, so he said, even if you wouldn't do it on your own, the Torah says do not commit murder. It doesn't say don't kill. You're obligated to kill in self-defense. And that's where the world is going way off base, that Israel has no right to defend itself. It's murder. I like to see them being attacked, and their children being attacked, and they're going to say, okay, you could shoot me because I can't kill you, I can't do anything. Let them do that. Yes?
I saw on internet a few days ago in a recipe how make roast cockroach.
Please, people are eating lunch.
Yes, in some.
And there are some crazies who are saying that eventually we're going to be eating insects, because insects have a lot of protein and we don't have to kill animals, we'll eat insects. This is sick. This shows how twisted people can become. But normal, we're talking about normal. Normal is humans do not want to eat these things. And yet the Torah turns it into a mitzvah. You get credit for not doing something you wouldn't do anyhow. That's what it means, that even when it comes to the negative commandments, do not commit murder. No one in this room has a desire to commit murder. Well, I'm looking at the room. Maybe I left someone out. So there are so many commandments that God did not have to tell us. We would do it anyhow. And that's true about some of the positive commandments. There are some positive commandments the Torah doesn't have to tell us if you see someone destitute and poor and starving that you should feed them and help them. Obviously, no normal child growing up in a normal household, and of course there are many dysfunctional households where these things are not evident, but in most cases you don't have to tell people to help starving people. If someone begs you for something and you know that they're telling the truth, you would help them. But yet the Torah turns it into a mitzvah, which means it turns it into a merit for you. You don't think you should give someone a medal for not committing murder. You don't get a medal for helping a poor, starving person. But you do get a medal once it becomes a mitzvah. Yes?
Well, we also have to think about, we have to have the intention of pleasing God with our act.
We don't have to. We don't have to.
Think of it as a connection to Hashem.
No, you don't have to. Even if you do a mitzvah without any intention of doing the mitzvah, you get credit for it. The ideal way of doing a mitzvah is to do it because God said so. And I'll get to that in a moment. But not only that, there's an interesting, fascinating teaching of our sages concerning the mitzvah of tzedakah, of charity. You're walking down the street and you had $100 bill and it falls out of your pocket, and a poor person who's starving picks it up and buys himself a meal. You don't even know that you lost $100, and if you're very rich, you wouldn't even notice that you lost it, even if you wouldn't care. You get credit for giving tzedakah. Tzedakah is about getting the poor, the needy, taken care of. And even if you don't have any intention, you get credit for it. If you do have intention, and you do it with feeling, you do it with love, it enhances the mitzvah. It makes the mitzvah that much more powerful. But the mitzvah on the minimum level, you get credit for it even if you had no intention of doing it. That's with regard to tzedakah. Other mitzvahs, you have to have at least intention that you're doing a mitzvah. You know you're doing a mitzvah. Yes?
How about if you do a mitzvah in setel? So,
you do it secretly?
yeah, like you give something and...
Okay, giving tzedakah that no one knows about it, like I never sign my checks, that way it's anonymous.
That's the highest form. That's the highest form.
Right, that's it.
Give something and...
Yes, you get a mitzvah of giving tzedakah, and it's considered to be a higher level when you give it secretly. However, in Judaism there's always a however, there's always a caveat. The caveat is that if you give it publicly, it'll encourage others to give. That's even better. Because when you give tzedakah, your concern should not be what you get out of it, which is you do get a lot out of it, but the concern should be what does the person who's at the receiving end get out of it. And if they get more and you get less, it's better. But someone once asked the Rabbi, what do I do? On one hand, it says you should publicize people who give, so encourage others. On the other hand, it says you should give secretly. So the Rabbi says, no problem, no contradiction. Give a large amount publicly and give a lot more secretly.
Because it's actually that the giver, the bestower, is actually more blessed than the receiver.
Right, but that's not the main reason for giving.
No,
that shouldn't be your objective. So again, let's summarize what we just said, that God, by giving us more mitzvahs, He takes things that may not even be considered a mitzvah by most people. It's a necessary thing. You would do it anyhow, and turns it into a mitzvah. This explains a puzzling statement, and it connects to Rosh Hashanah. I like to connect everything to the holiday we're entering into. One of the customs of Rosh Hashanah on the first night in particular is to eat a pomegranate. A pomegranate is one of the fruits that Israel is known for. It's one of the 5 fruits. Israel's known for grapes, olives, dates, figs, and pomegranates. So why do we eat a pomegranate? Why not eat a fig or a date? You could, but that's not the part of the custom. And the olive and the grape, why not those? Why the pomegranate? What's so special about the pomegranate? And the answer is the pomegranate is filled with seeds. In fact, that's the whole fruit. Other fruits, the seeds are not the main part of the fruit, and sometimes the seeds are thrown out. But the pomegranate, the whole essence of the fruit are the seeds, and it has many seeds. How many seeds does it have? There's a tradition, whether it's a legend or it's that there has 613 seeds. And I mentioned this in another class that
People do, it's not that many.
I counted pomegranates that had less, and I had pomegranates that had a lot more. Right, but one of my sons once counted a pomegranate with someone supervising to make sure he wasn't cheating, and it was exactly 613.
Wow. It's also a metaphor. It's a metaphor.
But the main point is, whether it has 613 or another version has 248, as many as the positive commandments, that's not the point. The point is it's filled with seeds. And the Talmud says something startling, that even the sinners of Israel are filled with seeds, filled with mitzvahs, the way a pomegranate is filled with seeds. That means even if you're a rotten lowlife, that's what a sinner of Israel is. It's the lowest class you can be. Even that person is filled with mitzvahs as a pomegranate is filled with seeds. So when we start the year on Rosh Hashanah, we want to invoke our righteousness, our mitzvahs. So we eat a pomegranate that's filled with seeds, which represent the idea of mitzvahs. Yes?
I have a question to ask you. We're talking about mitzvah. I'll give you an example. Person A gives tzedakah, person B has parnasa for another individual. Is one mitzvah greater than another, or they're all the same?
No, they're not all the same. There are many gradations. If you give...
That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah, the Rambam lists 8 different levels of giving tzedakah. The lowest level is you give begrudgingly. That's the lowest level. The highest level is you provide someone with an opportunity to earn a living. That's the highest level.
So
where they don't depend on you. They don't need you anymore. They can be on their own.
Are prayers a form of tzedakah? Can you actually spiritually, is that considered tzedakah?
It's a spiritual. If you prayed for someone and that person is helped, you gave a spiritual form of tzedakah. Yes, but nothing is a perfect substitute for cash. The poor person will say, "I love your prayers, but please, can you give me some money?"
There was one level above where, like the Hebrew Kadisha, where you're doing a mitzvah for someone.
Okay, that's said to be a true kindness, because you're not expecting the person to whom you bestowed kindness to repay you. Right, that's in a different category. It's not listed as one of the 8, but it is a higher form, because you're not expecting to get any repayment from the person. Now, so how could we say that a sinner of Israel, when we say sinner of Israel, means someone who really likes to sin and really does a lot of them, is filled with mitzvahs like a pomegranate is filled with seeds? So the answer is, now that we know what we just learned, that even if you desist from doing things that you wouldn't have done anyhow, even the sinner of Israel is not going to become a mass murderer. He gets credit for it. We get credit for everything we do right, even if we did not need to be told about it. God gives us credit for it. It's not the same. The Talmud does say that if a person was in a position where they were tempted to commit a crime and they don't do it, they get credit, full credit. But even if you were not in that position, you didn't have a desire to commit the crime, and you don't commit the crime, you still it gets counted as a mitzvah. And therefore, even the sinners of Israel have so many mitzvahs. I just want to mention something a little bit tangential, but it's connected to this statement. Someone once came to the Rebbe and needed for a blessing, for some help, for something. He was sent by another Hasidic rabbi known as the Satmar Rebbe. Now, the Satmar group are known for their very strong opposition to Jews who are not observant. And we're very, very opposed to Zionism because it was brought in by non-religious Jews. And this chassid who needed to be helped, he came to his Rebbe, the Satmar Rebbe, and he said, "Can you please help me?" And he said, "I can't help you. You have to go to the Lubavitcher Rebbe." who has the opposite ideology. So he comes to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe asked him, did your Rebbe speak on a matter of Torah recently? He said, yes. What did he talk about? He cited the passage in the Talmud that even the sinners of Israel are filled with mitzvahs like a pomegranate is filled with seeds. And the Rebbe then said, what did he say about that? He said, he asked the question, how could it be filled with mitzvahs if he's a sinner of Israel? When the Rebbe heard that, the Rebbe became very serious, and the Rebbe said, I asked a similar question, but a little from the opposite side. If they're filled with mitzvahs like a pomegranate, how could they be called sinners of Israel? It's a different perspective. The Rebbe was telling us that the essential thing is even the sinners of Israel are intrinsically, are essentially filled with mitzvahs, and anything they do wrong is external. It's like you pour water in a cup and it overflows. Where does the overflow go? On the outside. Same thing is the essence of the Jew is to be filled with mitzvahs. So how do we explain that? How could you be filled with mitzvahs when you're such a sinner? The answer is because every day that you're breathing, you're doing a mitzvah. You're doing a mitzvah because you didn't go out and commit a crime, and you're doing other things that you don't even realize are mitzvahs. That doesn't justify being a sinner, of course, but it means that you get credit for all that, and that's why we have so many mitzvahs. Now, Maimonides has a different take on this. Maimonides says that ideally, and this is where what your response to your question, ideally, we should do a mitzvah for no ulterior motive. We should do a mitzvah for one reason only, because this is what Hashem, what God wants from us. That's called lishma, for its own sake. But that's not easy. That's not easy for most people. Try to get a child to do something because it's the right thing. You have to encourage the child. You'll get a prize, you'll get a candy, you'll get some gift, you'll get some recognition. And adults, in most cases, are like children. The only difference is the child wants a toy car, and the adult wants a Mercedes. That's the only difference, the size of the car. But we want to get something out of it. We hope that at least once in our lifetime we would do something so pure that it's the purest that you can imagine. If we only had one mitzvah, we only had a few mitzvahs, the odds of us doing something on the highest level would be very minimal. God gives us so many mitzvahs that between all the mitzvahs that we'll do, there will be at least one that we'll do for the highest reason. And that elevates, the Rambam doesn't say this, but this is what Hasidic philosophy says. When you do one mitzvah the right way, the perfect way, it elevates everything else. If you say one prayer with such sincerity, even though the other prayers you don't say with sincerity, it elevates all your prayers. When you study Torah for the right reason, it elevates all the Torah that you study. So that's why when God gives us all these mitzvahs, it elevates us, because we're going to at least do one mitzvah the perfect way. Now, the others are not nothing. Every mitzvah counts. Every mitzvah connects us to God. Every mitzvah changes our lives. But it's still not the ideal. And we have so many mitzvahs, we'll do one at least for the ideal. I just want to go back for a second. Any mitzvah that we do has benefit only because it's a commandment. And this goes into a subject that we probably discussed once before. In the Talmud, there's a whole question: which is greater, to do a mitzvah that you're told to do, you're commanded to do, or to volunteer to do a mitzvah that you're not commanded? Most people would say, and that's more intuitive, that a volunteer is more praiseworthy than someone who does it because they're told, they're ordered to do it. You help someone, you were not told you have to help them, but you went out of your way to volunteer. That's greater than if you're commanded to do it. The Talmud concludes, no, that's not the case. When you are commanded to do it, it's greater than when you do it voluntarily. Why? So there are different explanations. One explanation given is, once you're commanded to do something, you awaken a contrary force in you. We call that the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, that starts to tell you not to do it. The minute you're commanded to do it, you will have opposition and resistance. And because of that, you get the credit that you wouldn't get otherwise if you did it on your own. There's no resistance to it. You're doing it out of the goodness of your heart. You're doing it because you're a good person. It's your nature. But when you do something you're commanded to do, you'll find it's difficult. There's a story told, I heard this from a rabbi who I think knew the person, who had a custom, and many Jewish communities, people have that custom, that they stay up all Thursday night to study Torah in preparation for Shabbat. And this chassid would do that every Thursday night for decades. And he had never any problem. He would take a little nap on Friday, and he was as good as can be. One day he was visiting his Rebbe. It was the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe who told him, I think it would be a good thing for you to be up Thursday night. His Rebbe told him to do it. Now, he had done that for decades before. That Thursday night, he couldn't keep his eyes open. He was struggling with it. He never had a problem. As soon as he was told he has to do it, that's when he developed resistance to it. So therefore, when you're commanded, if I'm told I'm not supposed to eat those critters, and if I wouldn't do it on my own, I wouldn't get credit for it because there's no resistance. But once you're commanded, you will find resistance. Yes?
It reminds me of a story that Rabbi Manis Friedman said about a husband and wife, and that a husband was told by his wife to get a rose, one rose. And he goes out and he loves his wife and he thinks, why just one? I love her so much. I'm going to give her 2. I'm going to give her 3, 6, a dozen. She'll be happier yet if I give her more. And he comes back with a dozen roses for her. And she says, you think we're made out of money? Why are you wasting so much money? I asked you for 1. And he would have done better if he had followed her directions and given her what she asked for. And likewise, Hashem asks us for X, and that's what He wants. It's
Right.
X, and we don't necessarily have to understand.
Sometimes when we do something on our own, we're doing it for ourselves. It's like the husband who brings like your example, a husband who brings a gift, or someone who gives a gift to a person of something that they like. But the person who's the recipient doesn't really care for it, doesn't need it, doesn't want it. And you feel offended when they don't use it because it was my gift. You should have used my gift. But when you give a gift, you should find out what that person wants or needs, and then it becomes a real gift. So when you do a mitzvah because it's God's commandment, you're doing it for God. Whereas if you do a mitzvah because you want to do it on your own, and you're not commanded to do it, you might be doing it for your own. We should all be that selfish that we do mitzvahs that we're not commanded to do. We're volunteering for it. No one is putting that down. It's just saying that when you're actually commanded, there's tension there, there's friction there that you have to overcome. Another thing, if you do something that's not a mitzvah, it doesn't create a relationship with you and God, because a finite human being cannot connect to an infinite God. Try to reach infinity. You want to have an infinite amount of water, so you just you empty out the oceans. It's going to be the same as a drop, because you can't bridge that chasm between finite and infinite. Whereas when God commands you to do something, God allows you to bridge that gap, because God is all-powerful, and He could create a situation in which a finite human being can be connected to an infinite God. That's why if you're not commanded, it's a nice thing, it's a good thing, but it doesn't really have the capacity to connect you to the infinite God. Once God tells you to do it, it creates a relationship. It's like the example given. You're Einstein, and you're working on your theory of relativity, and a peasant walks into the room who doesn't even know how to read and write. You have no relationship. But the moment Einstein gets thirsty and he says to the peasant, can you get me a glass of water? There's a relationship, even though they're on totally different levels. When God tells us to do something, that creates a relationship, which you only have when you're commanded to do.
And the 613 mitzvot, I would assume, are complete for a human being, that it's all that is prescribed for a human being. It's a complete set.
It's complete, yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
What form God gave me command? I have to hear voice. I have to read in some places. How I have to recognize what God?
It's in the Torah.
Me?
That's if it's not in the Torah, it's not God.
So
It's man-made.
say one mitzvah, if I do this with pleasure, do for other people. Of course, when I do this with pleasure for other people, mostly people have pleasure too. So it's mitzvah.
A mitzvah is when you do something that God commands you to do.
How, in what form?
There are 613 forms. If you put on tefillin, that's a mitzvah. If you give tzedakah, that's a mitzvah. There are mitzvahs between us and God, and there are mitzvahs between us and other people. Giving tzedakah is between you and the needy person or the needy cause. And putting on tefillin is between you and God. Now, it's true that any time we do a mitzvah for God, it automatically helps society as well, because they're intertwined, they're interwoven. The word in Hebrew that they translate as merit, lizakot, the root of that word comes from a word that means to refine. Lizakech means to refine someone. Mitzvahs are not just merits for us, and we're accumulating more merits, but mitzvahs have a refining effect on the person. They make you a better person. Now, there are different levels of mitzvahs. The more the mitzvah is done with pure intentions, the more it refines us. Another thing, one of the commentators explains that by giving us so many mitzvahs, God is telling us, my focus is on you attempting to do the mitzvahs. I'm not looking for results. As opposed to an employer who employs workers, and he says, look, we have a project. We have to build this building. I'm hiring you to make sure that building is built. And you work very hard, and you put in a lot of time and effort, but there's no building. The employer will say, you're useless. What do you mean I'm useless? I did so much. I work so hard. I work 14 hours a day. I use my own money even to do things. So the employer says, but I don't need you if you can't do the job. When it comes to Torah and mitzvahs, God is not telling us you have to finish the job. Actually, there was a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. It's not your job to finish the mitzvah. That's not your responsibility. God will take care of that. Your job is to make the effort to do it. And that's why the more mitzvahs we have, the more effort we could invest. And that's what it's all about. Now, you can't say, well, I don't have to do all of it, I'll do none of it, or I'll do very little of it. No, you have to do as much as you can do. But you don't have to finish everything, because if you thought you had to finish everything, you wouldn't even start. Most people would be discouraged. I'm not going to succeed anyhow. But Judaism says you don't have to succeed. Success is measured not by the result, but it's measured by your effort. And by the way, once you put your effort in, God will see that the result will be there. That's God's job, to make results. Our job is to make the effort. And the more effort we put into it, the more it refines us, the more it connects us to God, and the closer it brings us to Mashiach. Because Mashiach's coming depends on our efforts. Does that mean that I single-handedly have to finish the job? No. The job will be finished by everyone in the aggregate of all the people doing mitzvahs together, and we've been doing mitzvahs for thousands of years. That will bring Mashiach, and God will grant our efforts with success. But we have to focus on every mitzvah that comes our way, and not say, why should I bother with mitzvah A when there's A to Z, and I'm not going to ever even reach B or C? That's none of your business. Your business is, now is an opportunity to do mitzvah A, do the mitzvah A. And even if Elijah the prophet would come and testify, you're never going to do another mitzvah. You have this low-life Jew, the sinner of Israel, the lowest class of Jew possible. Of course, present company excluded. You have the lowest of the low, and you have an opportunity to do a mitzvah with him and encourage him to do a mitzvah. And Elijah the prophet will come and say, you know what? He'll do this mitzvah, but he'll never do another mitzvah again. Some people would say, why waste your time? The Rabbi would always emphasize, that mitzvah is all that counts. The rest of everything else is irrelevant. You have that opportunity to do what God wants you to do. Who cares if you'll do another mitzvah? Now, it just so happens, and this is a secret, when you do one mitzvah, it's like a drug. You'll want to do another mitzvah, and you'll become addicted to mitzvahs, and you'll become a very good person. But that's a secret. We don't tell everyone that, because we don't want people to think that we wanted to become addicted. But the truth is that every mitzvah will lead to another mitzvah. But even if we knew that it will not succeed, you still have not just the right to do the mitzvah with this terrible, terrible lowlife, but you have an obligation. And this is a difficult question to answer, but there are certain Jews who are on the side of the enemy, who want us dead, who advocate support for Hamas. They're prominent in the political arena as well. I'm not going to mention any names. But if I had an opportunity, if I'm seeing him and I can have an opportunity to get him to do a mitzvah, I would ask him to do the mitzvah. The fact that he deserves maybe even to get the harshest punishment for his evil doesn't excuse him from doing the mitzvah. Maimonides makes this point. When we have time. Maimonides wrote a letter to the Jewish community in Spain and Morocco because the Jews were forced by the Muslims. This is hundreds of years before the Inquisition in Spain by the Christians. The Muslims did it before the Christians. They forced Jews to convert to Islam. If not, they would be killed. And many Jews converted to Islam publicly, but privately they would observe Judaism, like the Marranos later, 100 centuries later. This is in the 12th century. The Inquisition in Spain happened in the 15th century. So you have a few hundred years before. So there are many Jews who felt very guilty. Publicly they were Muslims, privately they were Jews, and observant Jews. They felt like they're hypocrites. So they wrote a letter to a prominent rabbi whose name we don't know, who lived outside of Spain. And this rabbi said, you're a bunch of sinners, your Judaism is worthless. Your Judaism is worthless because you're practicing the Muslim religion publicly. And he really castigated them and he demoralized them. And many of them were thinking of converting to Islam in earnest, all the way. So Maimonides, who was a young man, in his teens or early 20s, wrote a letter to save the Jewish community. And he wrote to them that you are not only that, but you're not, when you do a mitzvah, not only it's not a sin, but you get credit for each mitzvah. And the Rambam refers to one of the most evil Jews that ever lived. His name was Yeravam ben Avad, Jeroboam. His name was Yeravam. When he came in Ellis Island, they changed it to Jeroboam. This Jeroboam was the one who broke away from the land of Yehuda. He took with him 10 tribes. And he rebelled against God. He created 2 cities in which he had shrines for idolatry. He was a horrible, horrible person. He's listed as one of the few people who will not have a share in the world to come. So the Rambam writes, even this evil, evil, evil Jew will be held accountable for one little mitzvah that he didn't do. Because every mitzvah carries its own weight. Now, even if you're the worst of the worst, you still have to do a mitzvah. And you should be encouraged to do that mitzvah. Was
that just after the passing of King Solomon?
That happened, right. It was, he broke away from Solomon's son, Rechavam. That means every mitzvah has its own significance. And even if you would never do another mitzvah, we do that mitzvah. And that's why we have so many mitzvahs that you can't escape it. Another story that connects to Yom Kippur, yes?
Of the 248 positive mitzvahs, Are they all attainable?
Now we can't because we don't have the temple. Of the 248, there's a list of 87 that we can still do. When Mashiach comes, they'll all be possible. So I was beginning to tell a story of this in the city of Barditchev, which was the city in which the rabbi was the illustrious, very, very prominent Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, who was known for his love for everyone. And a Jew came to him. He summoned a Jew day before Yom Kippur. This Jew was the biggest sinner in town. Any sin you could think of, he did. And he was proud of his sins. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak summons him to his study the day before Yom Kippur. So the man thinks, obviously, he's going to be berating me and putting me down and criticizing me for all my sins. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, who was very far from just joking or not being sincere, says to him, I am envious of you. And he looks at him, he said, you must be mocking me. You're envious of me? Of all people, I'm the biggest sinner in town. He said, yes, I'm truly envious of you. How could you be envious of me? He says, because it says that if a person, a sinner, does tshuva, he repents sincerely out of love, all his sins turn into mitzvahs. If I lived another 1,000 years, I could never do as many mitzvahs as you would have in one moment, in one instant. So I'm truly envious of you. And that had an impact on this person, and he changed. So even your sins can be turned into mitzvahs. That's how powerful a mitzvah is. That you can even take the sins and turn them into positives, negatives into positives. Any questions? Yes?
Isn't honesty a mitzvah in itself? You were talking about the guy who found...
Yes, honesty is a mitzvah.
He finds money. You know, the poor guy finds...
Okay, you're asking a good question. If the poor guy finds money and he knows who it belongs to, he knows who lost it, then the question is he allowed to keep it? And it depends, it gets into a very technical discussion. In Jewish law, if someone loses something and they know they lost it and they give up hope, the person who finds it is allowed to keep it. Morally speaking, he should still return it if he knows who the person lost it.
You know that somebody gave up hope.
You'd only know based on two things. Number one is if you heard the person say, you know what, I lost $100, I'll never get it back, then you know that the person gave up hope. But there's a simpler way of knowing. Money, there's no way a person could identify money. If someone says, I had a picture of Benjamin Franklin on it. Even the serial number is not proof because you might have had the money, but you spent it in the store and you remember the serial number. That doesn't prove it's yours. Money doesn't have... Now, if it was a wad of cash, and $50, $100 bills, and it was a red ribbon tied in a red ribbon, and you say, then that's a different story, because then the person can identify it. But if it's just a $100 bill by itself, we assume the person gave up hope if they knew they lost it. But if you find it before they really knew they lost it, you have an obligation to return it to them. Because they certainly didn't give up hope if they didn't know that they lost it. These are the laws in the studying the Talmud that usually children, when they start learning Talmud, they study these laws. And the idea is that everything that we do in life, in our business, in our walking down the street, has a teaching of Torah relating to it, and turns that experience into something holy. So when you're walking down the street, when you're engaged in business, and you don't cheat your business competitor, your customer, you are doing a mitzvah. Someone once complained to a rabbi that he was a wealthy man, he had investments, and because of that he didn't have to work, and he studied Torah all day. And then he lost a lot of his money, and he had to go to work. And he says, I feel terrible, and I used to be able to study Torah all day, now I have to work. And the rabbi says, what do you mean you feel terrible? Now you have so many more mitzvahs. When you were studying Torah, you weren't tempted to cheat someone in business. You weren't tempted to not pay your employers on time, and all the mitzvahs that relate to business. But now that you're working, you have so many more mitzvahs that you can do. you should not be unhappy about that. You should be very happy. I think it was the Kotzker Rebbe with whom it happened.